GearNetwork.com.
This is a Gear Network production.
Episode number 1.5 of the Good Guys with Guns podcast. The reason I'm going with 1.5 is because I'm only one half of the Jordan and Tom combo. I guess you could call me the diet version of, I'm fat, so maybe not diet, but you could call me the other version of the show. Tom could not be here tonight. He does say, God bless us, everyone. Wanted me to make sure I got that message across to you all. So, on this episode, I intend on discussing the lawsuit filed January 23rd. I'm going to talk about the Hearing Protection Act of 2017, albeit briefly, and its differences from its predecessor, the Hearing Protection Act of 2015. But first, I'm going to get through some housekeeping and give you guys some show updates. It has been a while since we've all been together, and by I say we've all been together, it's been a while since you've heard me talk at you. So, you can email the show at ggwgpodcast@gmail.com. We are on Twitter at ggwgma, and on Facebook you can find us at ggwgpodcast, or you can look up the Good Guys with Guns podcast page. We do ask that you like and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We hope you subscribe on Google Play, which we are now on, and iTunes, so that you get the latest episodes as they launch going forward. Speaking of that, updates. Let's hit it. We launched one episode, and then Tom and I spoke, and we wanted to do things a little differently. We kind of revamped the idea we had for our original show for episode number 2 to a whole different episode, which does take some time to put together. So the goal from here on out is to put out one episode a month. This is going to count as our episode for the month of January, just because I think it takes precedent and needs to be kind of talked about and addressed. Then going forward, you should hear from both Tom and I, hopefully regularly, at least once a month. Some of the things that we do want to do, we want to extend an invite to anybody in the gun community in Massachusetts, be it instructor or armorer, shop owner, whatever you are in the gun community. We want to give you a place to share your voice, talk about some of the things you offer, talk about what makes you a good instructor, a good armorer, or maybe even just talk about the process that you went through to get to where you are. Whether it be you went to SIG and took the armorer's courses, whether you've gone through the process of getting your FFL, whether you've gone through the process of getting your FFL and opened up your own shop, being an NRA certified instructor and teaching firearms courses, or being a field instructor and teaching people the basics of shooting. And if you would like to jump on, let us interview you, let us talk to you, let us share your story, by all means, let's get you doing that. We also plan on doing some product reviews, kind of talking about some of the classes that we're going to take going forward. I think what we're going to offer is pretty cool, and giving a voice to the members of the Massachusetts gun community that haven't really necessarily had a major voice before on this format. So that being said, a little bit of background on the lawsuit filed on Monday the 23rd. The 22nd was a Sunday. Com2A had sent out a kind of a cryptic message saying, stay tuned for a major announcement of organizations coming together to drop the hammer. There was a lot of buzz about what that meant. And then Monday rolled around. Com2A sent out another message. Tune into NRA Live with Colin Noir at 5 p.m., where they're going to make a major announcement. So I tuned in because that was a big enough tease for me. And I got to see Mr. Brent Carlton, who's the director and president of Com2A, basically talk about gun life here in Massachusetts a little bit, which was kind of cool because that's a national stage for those who watch NRA Live. And then he made his announcement, and his announcement was that Goal, Com2A, and the NRA have joined together in a joint lawsuit against Governor Baker, A.G. Healy,
Blowjob! Blowjob! Blowjob!
Daniel Bennett, who's the Secretary of the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, which basically is in charge of the Firearms Records Bureau, Colonel Richard McKeon, and the Mass State Police. And so this was kind of cool. I specifically heard him say that this was in challenge to Healy's enforcement. That's what I remember. And it could be because, I was busy trying to divide attention between that and, my family. And so I specifically heard challenging the assault weapons ban. There's a little bit of a surprise in here, a surprise twist that I'll get to very quickly, actually, within the first few minutes of me talking about the lawsuit. So the lawsuit itself is 33 pages of filing. There's some introduction, a little bit of background. Then they go through some facts. And this is how I'm going to go through this because there are sections that I'm skipping. They do talk about the assault weapons ban. They do talk about Healy's enforcement action. And some other things. In the introduction, this piece here, they start to build their case. They start to lay the groundwork. Very first thing that they talk about is DC v. Heller and McDonald v. Chicago. And they're used as reference points, and these are the main arguments taking shape, specifically around the Second and 14th Amendments. To quote the filing, the Second Amendment elevates above all interests the right of law-abiding responsible citizens to use arms in self-defense of hearth and home. That's DC v. Heller. And then McDonald v. Chicago, applying the Second Amendment to the states through the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Second Amendment protects arms that are in common use for lawful purposes like self-defense. They also quote Heller in that. They jump down to Massachusetts' ban on firearms labeled assault weapons. They talk about how the term was never actually created until 1989. It was never used. It didn't exist in the lexicon of firearms. It was a political term developed by anti-gun publicists to expand the category of assault rifles to allow an attack on additional firearms as possible, basically defined by evil appearance. There was a wonderful video done earlier today, or I wouldn't say earlier today, but posted today in one of the groups that I am in on Facebook. And I am kicking myself because I don't think I saved it, but I will post it. I will find it and post a link to it in the description of the episode, where one of the members of one of these groups actually discusses the term assault weapons and how it's fake, and it's a great video. And again, I'm kicking myself for not saving it. Anyway, they go on to talk about the phrase copies or duplicates as not being defined in mass law or by any court's decision. So it leaves it susceptible. It's a tough word to say in any setting. Can do it right there. Susceptible to many different interpretations since 1998. Okay. They go on to talk about the enforcement notice banning common and popular firearms. They again throw back to Heller on this, really hammering home that this was decided law by the Supreme Court in a previous case. They go back to the 14th Amendment, and this is all in the introduction, laying the groundwork. And it comes up in regards to defining the term copy or duplicate. And because of the vagueness of the term, it requires citizens to know the inner workings of all banned firearms. Which is beyond the ken of the average citizen. Those are exact words from them. So here's the surprise twist, right? I'm reading through this, and I get to this paragraph, and I go, well, that's weird. I listened to this, I read this first paragraph, and I reread it, and was like, oh, maybe they're just kind of throwing this in here. So I'm going to read it to you. Massachusetts also prohibits the acquisition and possession of standard magazines with a capacity of greater than 10 rounds. This prohibition prevents law-abiding responsible citizens such as plaintiffs from acquiring and possessing standard capacity magazines for their firearms, which unconstitutionally restricts plaintiffs' ability to defend themselves in their homes. So they dedicate this whole paragraph to standard, and they use that word standard several times throughout the filing, magazines. And I'm like, oh, that's whatever. I didn't think twice about that other than rereading that paragraph for the first time twice. And then they go on, desiring to acquire these constitutionally protected firearms and magazines, but credibly fearing for prosecution, plaintiffs bring this suit to protect their rights under both the Second and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution. Plaintiffs seek to, 1, protect their Second Amendment right to acquire and possess constitutionally protected firearms and magazines. firearms, and magazines. 2, to prevent defendants from enforcing the notice of enforcement retroactively to transactions that were legal to the time they occurred. And to 3, prevent defendants from enforcing an unconstitutionally vague law. So I sit there and I read that, and I actually reread that one twice, and I said, they're going after magazine restrictions and the assault weapons ban. This was news to me, because I probably missed Brent Carlton saying this to Mr. Colin Noir, but I know that some of you who've already looked at this are probably going to go, Jordan, you're stupid. This is just regular news. But to me, that's big news. They're going for a grand slam here. And so, the final paragraph of the introduction. Plaintiffs respectfully request that this court declare that Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 140, Sections 121 and 131 collectively, will be known as the challenged laws, and the notice of the enforcement infringing plaintiffs' constitutional rights and cannot be enforced, and 2, enjoin defendants preliminarily and permanently from enforcing Massachusetts' prohibition of constitutionally protected firearms and magazines. So right there, they're telling you, right in the beginning, what they're looking for. At the end, they'll summarize with a more in-detail statement, step-by-step, about what they're looking for. So they go on to talk about the parties involved here. I'm not interested in the parties, unfortunately. You guys don't need to know about the citizens and why they're involved in the lawsuit. You just need to know that they were picked to represent us as a whole. I will say that Goal is a plaintiff in this on behalf of its membership as well. If you are not a member of Goal, join, because they are doing something great for their membership right now. Overwatch Outpost and On Target Training are also plaintiffs in this. So that being said, I go through and I jump down to facts. It's the next big section that I want to look through, and I spent a lot of time going through this. Some of the key points in the facts section is that the banned firearms were all semi-automatic, with the exception of the AK platform, which can also be fully automatic. There's a footnote here basically saying, we understand that fully automatic firearms are regulated by the federal government and are not being challenged by the citizens of Massachusetts. So essentially, we're not looking to get fully auto AKs legal here in Massachusetts. What we are looking for is getting the AK platform semi-automatics and AR platform semi-automatics back. They go on to list the sales amounts and the popularity of the banned rifles across the country, and some simple facts about long guns and self-defense. Things like being able to reacquire target, handle recoil, steady the firearm, and how much easier they are to use in self-defense situations over handguns. That being said, they then go on to reference a 1994 ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court that recognized that the currently banned firearms are traditionally considered lawful possessions. And this was in Staples v. U.S. in 1994, and stating that the AR platform firearms are a class of firearm that are traditionally have been widely accepted as lawful possessions. So, again, settled law upended by Healy's enforcement. They do go on to discuss the banned magazines as standard equipment. Again, they use the term standard magazines, standard equipment. And so the what they do here is kind of an interesting way to phrase it. Banned magazines are provided as a standard equipment for nearly all semi-automatic pistols and rifles sold in the United States. Because of the Second Amendment protecting the right to possess firearms that are equipped with detachable magazines, there's an attendant right to possess detachable magazines necessary to render the firearm operable. Again, they're calling it standard, coming standard with the purchase of a firearm, making it well aware that everywhere else, with few exceptions, these magazines are, 15 rounds is not that big a deal in other places. So they do go on. The next big section here discusses the Massachusetts prohibition on assault weapons and large capacity feeding devices. I'm not going to read through the law for you. We all know what it does. We all know that it incorporates the federal ban. They talk about flash suppressors, collapsible stocks, threaded barrels, bayonet mounts, etc. So we all know this stuff. This is all stuff that if you're listening and you don't know what I'm referring to, please go to the Mass General Laws and read through Chapter 140, Section 121. Next is still the assault weapons ban, the large cap prohibition. And what I do want to do briefly is read one statement that I think is pretty damning to Healy's description of copycats or duplicates. The legislative history of the federal ban reveals that the then director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, John McGaugh, explained that if banned firearms could be modified to remove certain features, such as bayonet lug or flash suppressor, such modification would remove them from the definition of assault weapon, even as a copy or duplicate. John McGaugh did not state that the phrase copies or duplicates referred to similar operating systems or interchangeability of components. And that was in Congress, May 2nd, 1994, that he gave that quote. They do go on to talk about the transfer of mass-compliant firearms. The real interesting piece from the mass-compliant firearms is that there is in Massachusetts law a requirement that the Firearms Records Bureau review all sales of firearms for compliance. And so under Mass law, records of all firearms transfers, including descriptions of firearm, make, model, serial number, etc., must be maintained by all sellers, including on Target and Overwatch, who are the plaintiffs. Defendants or their agents are required to inspect these records for violations of Massachusetts law each year. Mass General Laws, Chapter 140, Section 123. And then the exact quote from that is, the licensing authority shall enter and inspect in a reasonable manner such records and inventory. They go on to say that tens of thousands of Massachusetts compliant firearms were purchased between 1998 and 2016, and there was never a notification that any of the plaintiffs or any other dealer transferring these firearms was illegal. So routine inspection turned up nothing wrong. That's pretty damning to the enforcement notice as well. They go on to talk about the volume of sales with the inspection requirement and how no action was ever taken by Healy's predecessors. And while the annual reviews did not lead to any action for almost 2 decades, Healy says that a 2016 review prompted sudden action and issuance of the notice of enforcement, upending decades of pre-existing law. That's kind of the big piece there. So I'm not going to go through Healy's enforcement because they talk about her enforcement notice, things that she specifically says in there. They do say that in Healy's enforcement, she specifically makes reference to the phrase copies or duplicates, and then goes on to discuss the fact that a relevant deciding factor of if these are copies or duplicates is also on the marketing of a shop towards its customers. So that in and of itself is vague and unconstitutional because it gives no full description of what that even means. They also talk about how she has claimed that she can change her decision on this and enforce this at any time and modify it, which is obviously kind of an issue. They do wrap up with some causes of action and then what they actually specifically are requesting to get out of this case. And so the causes of action, the big thing here, and I want to read this because I find it interesting. United States Supreme Court held that a prohibition of an entire class of arms that is overwhelmingly chosen by American society was unconstitutional, especially when the prohibition extends to the home, where the need for defense of self, family, and property is most acute. So that came from Heller. And then there's a case that most all of you should be familiar with. The arms protected by the Second Amendment are those in current use today. See Cattaneo versus Massachusetts, 2016. That decision rejected the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts' reasoning that stun guns were not protected by the Second Amendment because they are a modern invention. I just want to take a second to step back. And I always appreciate when somebody who's so anti-gun says, well, the forefathers were talking about firearms, muskets, and single-shot rifles. They weren't talking about ARs and AKs. To which I first reply, have you ever seen a pepperbox revolver or a puckle gun or a Giandoni air rifle? Because those existed at the time and designed to fire multiple shots as quick as possible. And then I say, you're having this argument with me mostly on social media, which didn't exist, meaning that you can't use it to exercise your right to free speech. And that usually stops them right in their tracks because they realize that they've made the double standard. Anyway, the firearm prohibition statute prohibits an entire class of firearms that are the kind in common use at present time, including AR and AK platforms. They go on to say that the definition of the state's inclusion of the banned weapons is unconstitutional and is nowhere defined in Massachusetts general law. Okay, so they go on to talk about copies and duplicates again. Firearms considered assault weapons by virtue of their features. Massachusetts banning the acquisition of the most popular rifles in the nation and standard capacity magazines sold alongside them. Then the notice of enforcement violates due process. So this is the count 2. And this is basically Healy saying she can modify this at any time. It's a retroactive ruling, supposedly, so which is against the law. You can't enact a law that criminalizes past conduct. And so I'm not going to go through this much farther. They do go on to talk about how copies duplicates is unconstitutionally vague. As explained, the definition of the firearms that fall within the scope of assault weapons is nowhere defined anywhere in mass law or by any court case in Massachusetts. It was also actually not defined under federal law. The legislative history of the federal ban makes clear that it was intended to be narrow. They do also go on to say that mass-compliant firearms were sold and never illegal before this interpretation. They do talk about the vagueness and the marketing aspect, making it relevant, but there's no guidance to what that means or how it's applied. So, skipping down now, this is the plaintiffs respectfully pray that this honorable court will enter a declaratory judgment that Mass General Laws, Chapter 140, Sections 131M, infringes on the right of the people of Massachusetts, including plaintiffs, to keep and bear arms in violation of the 2nd and 14th Amendments to the United States Constitution, and is void and unenforceable. Enter a declaratory judgment that the notice of enforcement interpreting the phrase copies or duplicates in Mass General Law, Chapters 140, Section 121 is unconstitutional, retroactive application of law that denies plaintiffs due process in violation of the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution and is void and unenforceable. Recap those two real quick. Chapter 140, Section 131 violates our rights and must be stricken is what they're asking for. Same thing with the enforcement, violates our right to due process and is unenforceable, is what they're asking for the second one. The third ask, enter a declaratory judgment that the phrase copies or duplicates in Mass General Law, Chapter 141, Section 121, is vague, fails to give notice, and violates the right of the plaintiff's due process of law, contrary to the 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution, and is void and unenforceable. So, Section 121 itself needs to be stopped and made unenforceable. This is the big one. Enter an injunction enjoining defendants from their officers, agents, and employees from administration and enforcement of Mass General Laws, Chapter 140, Sections 121 and 131M. And, then they ask for attorney's fees and any other relief that the court sees fit. So, essentially, after speaking with a friend of mine who studied law, she was very clear that a court can look at this and say, we do believe that the enforcement notice was done in violation of the 14th Amendment, and they can totally wipe that out and still require us to have mass-compliant firearms and rifles and restricted magazines to 10 rounds. They can say that the enforcement was no good and the magazine restriction is no good, but mass-compliant firearms are still protected by the 14th or by the Second Amendment, and therefore we can still have mass-compliant firearms. Or they could accept that what they're looking for is a full-out erasure, a full-out unenforcement notification on the assault weapons ban, meaning we get free state rifles and the magazine restrictions. Now, it was also explained to me by somebody who is a friend who studied law that if this goes through and we no longer have the assault weapons ban in Massachusetts, due to the Consumer Protection Act, kind of like we're used to with the requirements on handguns in Massachusetts, they can still restrict some of the rifles coming into Massachusetts. And so that's something that we should be aware of. I don't know how that would work out, but it's something that I think we're all getting caught up in what the ask is here and how big this is, but we're not thinking of the other side, which, like I said, could be that we're still a little restricted based on the consumer protection list, the list of features needed to be approved for sale for the general public. I guess there's no real list, but you know what I mean. The features on the handguns that we have, they could apply some of those features to rifles, if that makes sense. Hopefully I'm explaining myself properly. So, that, my friends, is the lawsuit in a nutshell. I tried to be as brief as possible so that you guys weren't bored as hell listening to me, but at the same time being as informative as possible and giving you the what I feel like were the major basis of the arguments for us and for the success of this lawsuit. I am going to throw it to break real quick, and you're going to hear some things about the fine programming on the Gear Radio Network, who supports this podcast, and most likely something about their Amazon page. I will say, if you do any shopping on Amazon, Targets, or otherwise, please go through the Gear Network Amazon page, and definitely it supports the show. It helps keep us free. It helps keep us from paying to be on the network. And the CEO loves when I plug this for him. So please, if you have the opportunity, definitely go through the Gear Network Amazon page to support our show. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this podcast. If you're looking to support this podcast and this network, visit shopgear.com. That's shopgere.com. It will take you right to amazon.com, to your Amazon account, and you can do all of your Amazon shopping. The difference is using our link versus going to Amazon's link is that you are telling Amazon that Gear Network referred you, and they end up giving us a small percentage of your purchase, which helps out this program and this network entirely. And of course, if Amazon's not your thing, it's understandable. On gearnetwork.com, G-E-R-E network.com, if you click on the top bar that says donate to Gear, there's several different PayPal buttons. You can donate to us as well if Amazon isn't your thing. Your support is vital to helping the Gear Network maintain this programming, this quality programming, and continuing our growth through the year. As always, thank you very much for your support and your listens and your downloads and your likes and your shares from all of us here at the Gear Radio Network.
All right, everybody, and welcome back. So I'm going to just need another 5 minutes of your time, roughly. Just about 5. So this is kind of fly by the radar. We've received a lot of news so far this year. National reciprocity was announced. As far as a bill going into Congress. Giving you just my honest opinion, I don't think it'll pass. I think there's a lot of financial interests in out-of-state licensing. I see revenue streams for out-of-state licensing dropping with national reciprocity and states not wanting that to happen. So you'll probably have some states that offer, like Arizona and like Utah, that offer out-of-state permits, for multiple states that they'll probably just say, we are not interested in having national reciprocity. You think about states like Rhode Island, Connecticut, even New Hampshire right now, unless constitutional carry passes up there, they'll even probably stand up against it and say, you're hurting revenue streams for us. Or they might. It's a tough one. I don't see it going through, but it would be great if it did. But I do want to talk about H.R. 367, which was introduced on the 9th of January to the 115th Congress. It is very much a similar bill to what was introduced in 2015 as the Hearing Protection Act of 2015. This is a very short, very easy bill to understand, which is why I really only wanted 5 minutes of your time on this. The long and short of it is that it takes silencers and suppressors out of the National Firearms Act. So the NFA is nothing to do with suppressors anymore. And it also removed the $200 excise tax that would be placed on that. And it basically places them in the same category as rifles and shotguns, meaning you go to your local store, you buy your rifle, you buy your suppressor, you go through the same background check for each one, and you're able to leave there without having to fill out any extra paperwork or pay the $200 tax stamp. So in summary, to provide silencers be treated as the same as long guns, if enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled. So that's the bill in short. Section 4 is the preemption of certain state laws in relation to firearm silencers. And what I'll do is I'll actually post this bill in the episode description, so you guys can all read it. There's also an interesting article from Ammoland, which is kind of cool. It gives a little bit more background. What I will say is that in 2015, there were not a lot of co-sponsors to this bill. It did not have a lot of support. So far, at last glance in 2017, this particular bill has already 78 co-sponsors. And I say this tongue-in-cheek, but it's actually a bipartisan co-sponsorship. There's one Democratic senator from Texas who co-sponsored this bill. Take that for what you want. I mean, the Democrat from Texas is probably still pro-gun. This was actually announced in the House Ways and Means Committee. What makes this bill a little bit more different, other than the fact that it's got more sponsorships in Congress this year, is that it's actually a tax reform bill, meaning it can get snuck into a budget reconciliation bill that makes it filibuster proof. So in the Senate, you need 60 votes to block a filibuster, and adding this act into a budget reconciliation bill voids that 60 vote filibuster. And so there's a very high likelihood that this can get passed through and attached in a budget reconciliation and never actually get blocked by any of the Democrats as long as we receive positive votes on this. I will say that the bill is being received very well, and they also talk about in the bill included information being that silencers are without regulation, mostly in England, and no real regulation in New Zealand, or tax for that matter. And so how we compare to some of the other countries who especially in England, have kind of more strict regulations around guns. Pretty interesting bill. I wanted to call attention to it. I want you guys to be aware that it's out there. I saw a couple of video reviews of the bill, and I'm always hesitant to speak with certainty about things that I have seen and I can't verify. But from what I understand, this bill would also make it so that silencers and suppressors are legal to purchase in all 50 states. I don't know how true that is. I'm still looking into that. And if I can find anything before the show goes live, I will add it into the show as a kind of a PS, or I will put it in the show description, or a separate thread on our Facebook page. But that's it for me, guys. So on behalf of Tom and myself and Good Guys with Guns, I thank you all for joining me, and until next time, stay safe and shoot straight. And in the words of my good buddy Tom, God bless us, everyone.
The preceding presentation has been brought to you by the Gear Network.